Hello, good friends. Good to see you again here on the Bill Press Spot, and thank you for joining us. Well, we know what Jefferson said, quote, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." Yeah, but we also know what Donald Trump would say. Get rid of all of them. Get rid of all newspapers, reporters, radio, and TV networks, except, of course, for those that run adoring stories about how wonderful I am every day. Indeed, Trump has launched an all-out war against the media, suing the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, cutting funding for public broadcasting, gutting the voice of America, threatening individual reporters, and successfully forcing CBS to fire Stephen Colbert and ABC to suspend Jimmy Kimmel, if only for a week. It's the same authoritarian playbook used by every would-be dictator before him, and it does raise the question about whether or not freedom of the media, freedom of the press, the First Amendment even exists anymore in this country. From his perch at Media Matters for America, starting in Donald Trump's first term, Matt Gertz, leading media critic, has been warning about the danger of Trump's crackdown on the media, and he joins us today to talk more about it. Hello, Matt Gertz. Welcome back to the Bill Press Spot. It's been too long. Good to talk to you.
Hey, Bill, good to talk to you too.
Thank you. Before we get into Jimmy Kimmel and Brendan Carr and all that stuff, I do want to ask you about a bit of breaking news, media related. We saw this horrific shooting at a Mormon church out in Michigan. And we see the pickup truck of the guy who ran into the church, set the church on fire, killed 4 people in the church. A pickup truck with 2 big American flags flying in the back of it, and a man with a Trump Vance sign on his fence. I don't know about you, Matt. I haven't seen anybody talking about this as a right-wing hate crime.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I am increasingly confused as to what the rules are supposed to be around this. There was a lot of interest from the right wing media over the last several weeks to claim that all political violence in this
Right.
country
Yeah.
emanates from the left, very specifically. There were a lot of arguments that this justified a vast campaign of state repression against people on the left. I think we're increasingly seeing from the Trump administration signs that they plan on pursuing that. Look, it's just not the case that political violence is exclusively the province of the left. I think it's
Or
a
mainly comes from the left.
Yes, I think that's correct. But trying to convince people who do not want to be convinced of basic facts like that is just you're rolling the boulder uphill.
Yeah. Yeah, but it just surprised me that the media itself is so silent on this. Obviously, not a person from the political left. At any rate, we have seen the big news, of course, last week. Oh my God, Jimmy Kimmel is gone. And then suddenly Jimmy Kimmel is back. Matt Gertz, what happened? Did Disney cave or did Donald Trump cave?
I think that Disney did cave. I think what we saw was a real outcry from the public that Disney had decided to bend the knee to Donald Trump and Brendan Carr and the FCC's effort to try to push Kimmel off the air. And I think because of that outcry from the public at large, people who canceled their Disney Plus subscriptions, people who are major figures in the arts saying that this was not acceptable, I think eventually they had to reverse their initial decision and put him back on the air.
Right. And of course, Nexstar and Sinclair follow through. But we have seen, in that case, it was just a week, right? But we saw CBS cave with Stephen Colbert, Mark Zuckerberg caving, Jeff Bezos caving, all of these media giants, not to mention Elon Musk, Matt. Their interest is not really journalism, isn't it? It's really bottom line and mergers and making more money.
I think that's exactly right. I wrote a piece before the election last October. And because I don't pull punches, the headline of the piece was Donald Trump's authoritarian playbook to crush the free press in a second term.
All right.
And the upshot of the piece is that the status of the free press in this country would not rest on decisions made by journalists, but on the decisions made by corporate executives who control huge multimedia conglomerates, of which news outlets are a tiny fraction of
Hmm.
their bottom line. You go down the list, NBC is owned by Comcast, ABC is owned by Disney, CBS at the time was owned by Paramount, since taken over by Skydance. CNN is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, Bezos owns the Washington Post, and so on and so forth. Most of these media companies, most of the major newsrooms that do the reporting that is crucial for understanding what is happening in the world, are parts of these huge multimedia conglomerates. And because of that, the people that are in charge do not necessarily have deep personal investments in the idea of the free press. And in fact, their bottom line can very much depend on attempts. Their bottom line can be manipulated by federal regulators
Hmm.
as a way to try to cudgel those news outlets back into line. And that's, I think, what we have seen over and over again. This was a strategy that Donald Trump attempted to deploy a couple of different times during his first term, and he
Hmm.
was unsuccessful then because these companies would actually go to court. They would fight it out against his administration. This term, we've seen much more crumbling and capitulation from those same figures.
And it looks like the names you mentioned, that Larry Ellison on the horizon, right, may end up being the biggest media boss of all, with less interest in journalism than any of the rest.
Yeah, this is something we're really going to have to keep an eye on. Larry Ellison is the founder of Oracle, one of these gigantic tech companies. He is a close friend and ally of Donald Trump's, major donor to his political apparatus. His son, David Ellison, was head of the Skydance
Mhm.
movie studio, and now, with his father's backing, has taken over Paramount and thus controls CBS News. At the same time, you have Ellison perhaps becoming part of this coalition of businessmen who are going to own TikTok. And now you also have news that David Ellison's company is going to make a play for Warner Brothers Discovery, which would allow him to also own CNN. So
CNN, yeah,
CNN, CBS, TikTok, all under the same roof, more or less. And
right.
Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's right wing newsletter company, that is also likely to be purchased by David Ellison. And she is reportedly going to take a major role in the CBS News ecosystem. So that's a lot of power that are going to rest in the hands of a small number of pro Trump billionaires.
And with the Jimmy Kimmel thing, so now it's somewhat resolved, but we certainly cannot expect for Brendan Carr and Donald Trump to stop here, right? They're on a mission, aren't they, to make sure that basically nobody gives him bad coverage, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Donald Trump has been very clear over the years that he wants propagandistic coverage from everyone in the media. He wants to basically turn on his television, and whatever channel he's looking at, it's like Fox News.
Yeah.
That's what he wants it to be. If you are not providing that coverage, you're an enemy of the people, and he wants to find some way to shut you down. Brendan Carr became FCC chair fully aware that was the case. The president has not shied away from publicly calling for various media outlets to have their licenses taken
Mhm.
by the FCC. And I think this skirmish is over, at least for now. And Kimmel and really all of us won, but there'll be another one down the line, no doubt about it.
Yeah. You mentioned President Trump's jumping on the license issue. I just want to play that quick clip for you and then talk about it on the other side. So here's the president saying to the networks, basically, you better watch out because I'm coming after you.
They're 97% against. They give me only bad publicity or press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away.
Their license taken away. Matt Gertz, does the president of the United States have the legal authority to do that?
Legal. So this is one of those situations where you need to decide if you want to take the president seriously or literally. I think we should definitely take him seriously on this. I think literally the ABC itself is not licensed directly. What the FCC does is they regulate the local
Local
broadcast
stations. Yeah.
stations,
Hmm.
right? And so they can threaten those, and even that's somewhat difficult. The stations renew over long timelines, but I think broadly speaking, what the president is saying is he wants regulatory power used against the parent companies of news outlets that give him bad coverage. And Brendan Carr can figure out the details about how exactly they do that. With Kimmel, it was Carr going on a right wing podcast and saying that in the wake of Jimmy Kimmel saying things about Charlie Kirk that he didn't like, that Disney and the affiliate networks needed to step up, or the FCC was going to have to take some sort of action against them. And Nexstar, one of those big affiliate
Hmm.
networks, is trying to do a merger right now. They're trying to buy several dozen additional local stations. They need approval from the FCC to do that. They need Brendan Carr to do them a favor. And so I think the implication of what Brendan Carr is saying is that if you make the decision that he likes, good things could happen to you. And if you don't make that decision, bad things can happen to you. And so at that point, the affiliate networks deciding whether they want to be on Brendan Carr's good side or his bad side. This is, to be clear, this is totally illegal. This is like a black and white violation of basic First Amendment jurisprudence. You're not supposed to do this, but actually, like, fighting that out in any real way over a short time frame is extremely difficult. We're dependent on the government deciding not to break the law,
Right.
and under this administration, that's very up in the air.
By the way, not that facts should get in the way, but I do have to ask you about the president's assertion that 97% of the media coverage of the Trump administration is negative. That's off by a factor of about 10, isn't it?
Yeah, I would have to look into this a little more. My understanding is that this is based on it's a Newsbusters statistic. Newsbusters is a sort of right-wing organization that critiques the media. They do what we do, except they're so much worse at it. But at one point, it's interesting. They've for decades had a rule that they're not allowed to appear head to head with a Media Matters staffer. They just have a blanket ban on joint appearances with us. And due to some sort of scheduling snafu, I ended up head to head on C-SPAN with Tim Graham of the Media Research Center of Newsbusters and asked him about this statistic. And it's basically you have a bunch of political operatives making judgments about whether particular segments are pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and that's going to get you a skewed a skewed viewpoint on that sort of thing. At Media Matters, we don't try to do that kind of content analysis. We just tell you like the amount of time that stories were covered or whether particular false claims were made or not made. But yeah, the right wingers went looking for a statistic about how all the media is mean to Donald Trump. They found it. That Donald Trump really liked it. He probably saw it on Fox and Friends, and now he's using it to justify trying to shut down media outlets that do reporting that he doesn't like. Congrats to Newsbusters. That is big impact.
Matt, I've always talked about you and your colleagues at Media Matters for America as good friends of mine because you watch Fox News so I don't have to, right? You guys really do monitor it. How and I know you more than anyone. You drive Fox crazy, which I love. But so here, Donald Trump has sued Fox News, saying because of the story, not Fox News, but Rupert Murdoch for reporting.
He's sued the Wall Street Journal, its parent company, some
Right.
journal reporters, and Rupert Murdoch over
The
the
birthday
story
book.
that
Right.
over the birthday card story. Yes.
And yet Fox News still, right, basically is Donald Trump's own personal network, right?
Yeah,
Why? What, don't
absolutely.
they
And
care
they
that
don't
he?
mention this either. Basically, what you've got here is when you have a sort of authoritarian leader and oligarchs who support him, one of the things that the authoritarian leader needs to do is make sure that the oligarchs understand that he's in charge and they are not. And so that I think is what we have here. Rupert Murdoch thought that he could run the Wall Street Journal as a fairly like normal national newsroom that
A news
also had,
operation, right? Yeah.
yeah, that also had right-wing opinion stuff from the editorial side. And he thought that he could run that like totally separately from Fox News, which is a total Trumpist propaganda machine, and that the latter would insulate him from
Hmm.
any attacks on the former. And Trump basically is making clear that that is not acceptable, that
Yeah.
having the Wall Street Journal do independent critical reporting into him and his administration is something that he finds personally offensive, and that he will try to destroy not only the journal but Rupert Murdoch over that. Again, this is one of those cases where I hate to say nice things about Rupert Murdoch, but the situation here is that because his entire wealth is built on news outlets, he has to have some amount of defense the of what those news outlets do. He can't just fold in some way around this and have the journal still maintain its stature and status. So this is not a situation like Disney or Paramount, where the news outlet side is just like a tiny vestigial limb on this gigantic multimedia conglomerate. He actually needs to care to some extent about the reputation of the news side stuff. And so he's fighting this in court, which is good. This is the way
Hmm.
you prevent authoritarians from seizing all control of the news apparatus and free speech in the country. You have to be able to actually challenge these actions in court and fight it out and not settle. And I think that's what we're seeing so far. Just as we're seeing with Trump's lawsuits against the New York
Right.
Times is going to settle. They're going to fight it out in court.
Hmm. And meanwhile, Fox News is still pure Trump propaganda 24/7.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's very little, if any, effort to separate themselves from the Trump machine and anything, including you're not seeing like Sean Hannity go out on his show and say Donald Trump's lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch is really beyond the pale and he should stop it. That's just
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
what they're in the business of doing. They know that their audience is built around their love for Trump. And as we saw with the Dominion lawsuits and then the Smartmatic lawsuit about the network's 2020 election coverage, the executives and the hosts understand that if they move away from what Trump says, then they are risking their audiences. And so they just won't do that.
Right. And Matt, as we know, the president has gone after not just the networks, but some individual reporters by name, face to face. I want to talk to you about that, and there's a lot more we can cover after a quick break here on the Bill Press Pod. Give us just a minute and hold on. We'll be right back. Well, good friends, it was good to see Donald Trump last week at the United Nations change his course and come out saying Ukraine should not have to give up any of its territory and urge Vladimir Putin once again to just drop this war. I hope Donald Trump sticks to that position. But in the meantime, the war in Ukraine rages on, but you know there who's on the ground, and that is Jose Andres and his World Central Kitchen. They are there just like they are anywhere in the world that people are suffering, providing free meals and other assistance for war victims. World Central Kitchen is there. They do such great work, which is why we frequently encourage you to check out their website, wck.org, and send them whatever help you can. World Central Kitchen, wck.org. And we're back with today's podcast here. Our guest, Matt Gertz, who's a senior fellow at Media Matters for America, a frequent guest here on the Bill Press Pod. and the man, as I said earlier, who drives Fox News crazy. And they let you know about it. They don't like Matt Gertz. That's why we like it so much. So, Matt, there are individual reporters, Jonathan Carr from ABC News, this John Lyons, an Australian journalist, and others, that the president gone after with John Carl. He said, yeah, they're going to come after you next, John, right? Because you're so nasty. I guess my question is it getting to where reporters still do their job anymore, right? Or is that
I think they can. I think that what we're seeing is reporters are still capable of getting good and important stories out there. I think they are doing it, though, at this point now under a sort of broad based threat that, at any time, they have to fear that the administration can decide that they don't want to play this game anymore, that
Mhm.
they want to put them in jeopardy in one way or another. So we reporters can have their access cut off, certainly, and that's a big deal. But in addition to that, I think there have certainly been threats of sort of criminal investigations of various types
Right?
into different
Yeah.
reporters. I think certainly as part of leak hunts, I think we're seeing a Justice Department that is more aggressive about particular tactics than the Biden Justice Department was. Bondi, early in her tenure as Attorney General, got rid of some old Biden regulations around that had protected reporters to a greater extent. And yeah, I think they do need to worry about the legal threats that they can come under. They need to worry about, in some cases, when they're covering ICE and protests, they have to
Mhm.
worry about their safety as well. I think when you've created an environment in which journalists are considered by the administration as a whole as the enemy of the people, that a lot can follow from that. And I think it's an unnerving time to be a journalist trying to cover this administration. But I think a lot of them are doing really great work, making sure that we all know what's going on. And I hope they'll be able to continue that.
And some of the best reporting that I've seen over the years has come out of the Pentagon. This is a special corps of reporters who know that field, who've worked there a long time, know the corridors, know the people, and are able to come up with some great stories out of there. Now, last week, Pete Hegseth said, you got to sign the pledge, right? If you're a reporter here at the Pentagon, you have to sign a pledge that you won't, basically, I'm paraphrasing, that you won't report anything we haven't approved first.
That's more or less what the marker laid down was, that they needed to basically be accompanied anywhere they went in the building, that they couldn't report on anything that they learned without approval.
Yeah.
That said, so obviously
It's
that is
pure
that
censorship, no?
it's pure censorship. It's basically attempting to turn reporters into propagandists. I don't know how far I don't know the degree to which it's actually been implemented at this point. And certainly, so the Washington Post were the ones who reported on that memo first, and then the Washington Post were also the reporters there who reported on the big Hegseth jamboree
Yeah.
in which the generals and admirals are being pulled in from all over the country to get a speech from Pete Hegseth about warrior culture and whatever else they want to talk about. So again, this is a case where great reporting is still being done to let us all know that this is happening, even against these conditions.
So you mentioned earlier Pam Bondi, who certainly seems to be an attorney general who do whatever the president wants. And she took, it goes beyond just clamping down on the media with her. It seems the media is included, but so is anybody who says anything in any way critical of the administration, which of course they define as hate speech. Here is the attorney general last week.
There's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who are using hate speech and putting cuffs on people so we show them that some action is better than no action?
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech.
We will go after you, Matt. As Peter Baker asked in the New York Times, is it hate speech or speech he hates?
Yeah, there was a fascinating backlash to this that happened
Yes.
on the right immediately after those comments, because as hate speech is a term that the right doesn't typically recognize. They typically view that as something that the left talks about and as a way to shut down the conversation or what have you. The idea of punishing people based on quote unquote hate speech is considered anathema on the right. And so you had instantly a real outpouring of vitriol from right wing commentators. You had the editors of the National Review saying that Bondi fails to understand the basics of the US Constitution. The Wall Street Journal editorial board said she lacks a basic understanding of the First Amendment. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh said she should be fired.
Cruz, right?
Ted Cruz criticized this as well. There was a real outpouring here, and she actually half clarified, half walked that back in an ex post the next day. But what I thought was very revealing was Donald Trump didn't criticize that. In
Yeah.
fact, that was what he was talking about when he said that Bondi was going to go after people like Jonathan Carl because he treats him so unfairly, supposedly. He was saying that Carl is guilty of hate speech, and therefore Pam Bondi will try
Mhm.
to prosecute him in some way. And after that happened, there was almost no criticism from the right of that, even though it's an even more direct use of kind of the same sort of threat. You didn't see National Review and the Wall Street Journal and the various MAGA media figures lashing out about that. You can criticize the king's advisors, but you can't come after the king
Yeah,
himself.
right.
Is basically the sentiment that we saw around that. But I think that's a very important distinction, right? Because Donald Trump is the president. He doesn't believe in basic principles of free speech. That's very obvious to anyone who pays attention to him. And the inability of the quote unquote free speech right to engage with that problem is a real signal that they're mainly only interested in protecting the free speech rights of themselves. They're not interested in that as a sort of broader philosophy of any kind.
And you warned about this ahead of time, as you pointed out, Matt, because isn't this Donald Trump is acting right out of the authoritarian playbook, right?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump has been very clear that he views Hungary's autocrat Viktor Orban as a model, that he wants to pursue the same types of a liberal democracy here in this country. And,
Vladimir Putin.
yeah, and I think people like Orban and Putin, who Donald Trump admires, were able to cudgel the press into line using the same sorts of tactics, trying to move media companies from the hands of critics into the hands of allies, nudging those allies to make sure they stayed in line, punishing them when they didn't. I think that is certainly his aim, to have a press that is not free, that is much more supportive of him and his administration. And that's something that I think is really anathema to the very principles that this country was founded on.
Well, we know today that the Second Amendment is under a lot of scrutiny and question. Donald Trump has petitioned the Supreme Court about the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. How secure is the First Amendment? Should we be worried about whether freedom of speech is on its way out or even exists anymore in this country?
I think we should be worried. I think that the First Amendment's protections are quite robust. I think the courts continue to protect them as such, in spite of Trump's various attempts to beat media outlets into submission through lawsuits and through adverse regulation. But the fact that the President of the United States doesn't believe in those First Amendment protections, and the willingness of so many of his supporters to aid him in that mission of his, means that the First Amendment and the free press are going to be under threat for the remainder of his tenure in office.
And it may end up being in the hands of the Supreme Court, which is also something I worry about. And you do too, I'm sure.
Yeah, and certainly Trump has said that he thinks that the major Supreme Court precedent on libel was wrongly decided, and he wants to
Mhm.
see it overturned. He wants it to be easier to sue people for saying things that are mean. And I think that is something, it's curious. That is something that the right seems to have a lot of problems with when it's happening in the UK or in Germany. But the fact that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, wants to move things in that direction, it does not seem to concern them very much.
Matt Gertz, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your great work in Media Matters. How can all of our good friends and our followers here on the Bill Press Pod keep in touch with Media Matters and your work on a day-to-day basis? What's the best way
You
to?
can find all of our work at MediaMatters.org, where I publish regularly, and follow me on all major social platforms at Matt Gertz, Gertz. If you do at Matt Gaetz, you're going to have a bad time.
Matt Gertz, not Matt Gaetz. Hey, thank you, Matt. Good to talk to you again. Thanks so much for your great work. We'll talk soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, that's it for today's podcast with Matt Gertz. Again, Media Matters for America, MediaMatters.org. Check them out. And here we go into another wild week under Donald Trump. Probably a government shutdown with mass firings of federal employees looming ahead. There's certainly going to be more charges that Donald Trump's Justice Department will be filed against some of his political enemies. There might be a vote on releasing the Epstein files, and got a big change up in New York, that wild mayor's race, now that Eric Adams has dropped out. We'll be following all of that news and anything that happens politically around the country, and wrapping it all up on our Reporters Roundtable this Friday. We love the Reporters Roundtable. We know you do too. So have a great week. But come back and see us on Friday. Take a look at all the news of this week with our Reporters Roundtable. We'll see you then.